Alright, welcome to June Gem number 6, and this is going to be around Nintex Workflow Constants. Now, I mentioned them in a previous gem. This will be a little bit more in-depth, and this will pretty much be the last bit of the Nintex Workflow part before we actually get into the actual workflow designing part. So let's have a look at this environment. This is a 2013 environment, and I'm in a SharePoint list, and this could be any type of workflow, whether it's a list workflow or a library workflow or a site workflow, whatever it is. So I'm going to go to the workflow designer. Now, I've just added a couple of actions here. Build string, which just puts together a little bit of string, a little bit of text, and puts it into a text variable, and a call web service action. And just show you a couple of different places where you would use your workflow constants and why. Now, when I open up this build string action, I do have a variable, so I'm going to store some data. It's called text email body. And I might want to insert some sort of reference. And you actually see I have all these different tabs. This is the one I'm going to focus on, which is workflow constants. And I just have this Google API key and an Uber server token. So probably don't want to use those ones. So let's come over here and I'll show you where your constants live first. So we're going to go into here. This is the site settings. This is for the current site. In this case, it's June 2016. There is a Nintex workflow section with a bunch of links in here. Now, you may or may not have access to this, so you may want to reach out to your site admin, site collection admin, and see if you can get access to it, or ask them to create these constants for you. Here's the Manage Workflow Constants button. So I'm going to go into here, and notice I have those two constants that we mentioned, but if you look all the way to the right, under scope, these are all farm-wide constants, okay? So they're available to any workflow anywhere in this particular farm, every web app, every site collection, every site. Let's create a new one. I click on the new button in the ribbon. It's my add workflow constant pops up. I'm going to call this, let's just do a welcome email body constant. Oops, constant. It can be a string, a number, a date, a credential, or a secure string. So let's look at string, and you know what we'll do? We'll do this. We'll do welcome email body header, and we'll just say welcome to the team. I'll leave this as is. Now, sensitive basically means you can only use it in specific areas or specific actions. So we're going to leave that as is. Let's actually copy all that. And we'll do another one, and we'll call it footer. In this case, we'll just say thank you, company, right? That's it. All right, there's my two constants that I've created. And if you look across to the right, you can see they're site level. So these are only available in the current site. So if I jump back to my workflow designer, open this up again, and now if I click on insert reference, workflow constants, there's my header and footer. So I can do header and maybe add a comma and then have some text, etc. And then insert the footer. And the final thing will be store that in the email body. So that becomes the email body. And that way you can do a send notification action. And we'll ignore all this, but we'll actually click on insert reference in the body and insert our email body. Right? Now, why am I doing this? Why didn't I just type this into the actual send notification action or into the build string action? Well, the reason why I would do this is because this part, the actual body of the email, will probably be different depending on what kind of email you're sending out, right? Think of this as maybe like an onboarding process. So maybe for onboarding of a developer, the email might look a little bit different to the onboarding of a C-level or a VP, right? So that might be different, but the header and the footer should be the same. You should have a consistent look and feel. So this allows you to have a centralized place where you can set the header and set the constant, the footer constant. What this means is that when I publish this workflow and I use it later down the road, when I need to change the header, maybe the company name changes, and I need to change the header, change the footer, I don't have to change my workflows. They will automatically pick up the fact that those constants have changed. So really powerful to be able to do it that way. Okay, that's that part done. Now the other part is around these types of actions. Actions that could potentially call other systems. Now you'll notice there's a URL section here. So what's the URL to the web service we're going to call? You can definitely use a constant for that if you need to. If you're talking about just calling inside SharePoint, you probably don't want to use a constant. Instead, you'd actually click on here and under common, you could actually put in web URL. Or if it's an external line of business system and the URL probably won't change in the future, then you can just simply create a constant and insert that into here. The other thing I would say is this username and password. Now you can definitely type in, well, let's do this, domain/moi and some password. Okay. Now you can definitely do this. I would do this if I want to test out my workflow and I click on run now and I actually go and see if it actually works. Right? That makes sense. But if you're going to go and put this into a production environment, do not type this in. Or especially if you're going to export this workflow and send it to somebody, even send it to support. If you hard code the username and password into here, when you export this workflow, this username and password will be clear text in that export file. So what you want to do instead is actually create a workflow constant. So again, let's go over here and we'll just say HRIS credentials. We'll go and put credentials in, and you could use the secure store if you want to, but let's say we type this in, and again we'll type in moi and whatever the password is. Nope, I don't want to keep that. Okay, there's my HRIS credentials. Go back to my workflow, and instead of this, click on the little lock. There's my credential constant, and that's it. Notice how it put in the name of the constant rather than the actual value. Now what it does is it will then read the Nintex Workflow database, or Nintex Workflow content or configuration database, and it will then get the credentials for us. So those credentials are actually encrypted and stored in that database. The great thing about this is if you export this workflow, you will give a workflow to somebody that just has a reference to something called HRIS credentials. It won't have the actual username and password in there. So that's great. Again, if if you have an issue with a workflow and you want to pass it to somebody to have a look at, you're not giving them your username and password or your farm admin username and password. The other thing is moving workflows from one environment to another. If you're building a workflow in your test or a QA environment, you test it out. If you hard code these credentials in and you move that workflow to production, you're going to have to go through each workflow or each workflow action to see where you've hard coded those credentials, and you'll have to change them because they'll be different for production. If instead you use a constant, as long as you have a constant whose name is HRIS credentials in production, you simply export this workflow from test, take it to production, import, and publish it. Right? So constants are a great way for you to be able to have different values that your workflows rely on for different environments. That way you don't have to modify your workflows, you simply can move workflows around very, very easily. Okay, now let's go back to here and say, let's say that HRIS credentials, I actually want people to be able to use them outside the site, maybe in the other sites in the site collection. I can actually click on this. Oops. I can actually promote these to become different levels, right? They can be created at different levels. So you could go to the site collection and create this as a site collection. You can also create these at the central admin level. So my apologies, not promote, but actually create them at the different levels. So we're looking at the site level. You can see I have site collection settings. So I can click on here and I can create a workflow constant here. We'll just say site collection constant, and we'll just give it some dummy value. Click on save. There it is there. Let's go back to our site level and refresh this. And you see I have my farm level, my site collection level, and my site level. Notice I can only change the constants at the level where I'm actually at. So I'm right now at the site level. only those are available to me. Now, where do you create farm level? You actually have to do that in central admin. So in that case, you will have to reach out to your farm admin to do that. But in central admin, there is a Nintex Workflow Management section. In here, there's a manage workflow constants right here, and you'll see those two constants right there. Just makes it a little bit easier for you to control, and give access to everybody in every site access to these constants. Now, the other thing you might want to consider is for something like credentials, you might want to lock these down. So notice if I just select this row, there's an edit permissions button up here. I can click on that and I can set permissions on who can actually use this particular constant. Okay, so really important to be able to use these. So now we've pretty much covered workflows and constants and where's Nintex workflow and Nintex forms and some basic things, some common properties that you'll find, even a little bit on inline functions. So what we'll do next is go into a little bit more of workflow design. So thanks for listening in and hope you enjoy the rest of the series.